Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey everybody, it's Jared. Welcome back to another episode of All Things Crime. Sure appreciate you as viewers and listeners. And man, we are passing lots of views and viewers and subscribers. And so if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and definitely share this episode. I am beyond excited about my guest today. His name is Travis Myers. He's a former detective with NYPD, and he's got, it's amazing how many stories. I had a booth next to him at CrimeCon this last year, and tons of stories, and it's just going to be a bunch of fun. But we're also going to talk about some fairly serious issues as well. So, Travis, welcome to the program, man.
Jared, so nice to see you again, my friend. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Got my, I'm in town for a day or two, and got some eggnog, man. How
ready for the holidays?
How bad can things get when you got that, right?
Yeah.
So, how about you? Are you how's New York doing?
New York is great. It's still here. Life is good for me. Happy fella. Really, no complaints. None whatsoever.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, to start out, you know what? I gotta actually read part of this, man, because first of all, you were a detective back in the 90s is when you started. You said
Correct.
You started under the Dinkins administration,
Yeah,
and then you served also in the Giuliani
I was hired
years,
under him, but most of my time I worked through the Giuliani administration. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, the key to that, I think, is people need to understand what New York was like in the early 90s. And especially prior to Giuliani coming in and actually allowing the police to do police work and cleaning things up. And at one point you said there were like 2,400 homicides a year in New York City.
Yes.
And if you put that into perspective, out of 365 days out of the year, that's what, 7, 8 homicides a day.
And I worked in the Bronx too, which was a busy area, and business was good. And I'm making a joke, but it was a busy place. The Bronx was, well, the city as a whole. All the way through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. It was a continual thing. In fact, what was it? I think in 1969 was the year that they actually broke 1,000 homicides for the first time. And throughout the 70s, it continued to get worse. And then, of course, in the late 80s, early 90s, the crack epidemic exploded, and a lot of that, though, I'm going to, which maybe we'll get into a little bit more of, I will actually blame on politics and politicians because, for us, it's going to sound like I'm going to beat up on the cops a little bit, and I'm not. Please understand that, because nobody loves the cop more than me. But that being said, a lot of the problems that we have with modern policing, okay, yes, are the police departments themselves, but not. It's because it's the politicians and the political will to get the job done. You see, us, the foot soldiers in this thing, the cops and the detectives, and that goes all the way up to chiefs and commissioners as well. Really, we're the lowest rung on the ladder when it comes to law enforcement. In fact, I'll even maybe argue the point a little bit that we are not really law enforcement. Why? Because we don't get to enforce shit. We basically are more or less truth seekers. We're the first on the scene, the first to assess the situation, and of course, detectives later on to investigate a situation. And all we get to do is present it to the courts, and then it's up to the district attorneys to decide. And usually, when they decide, they're deciding, whether or not it's a winnable case, if it's worth being bothered with. It's got nothing to do with justice. And it sounds very, very negative, but from my side of things, I don't believe in justice. There's no such thing, sadly. And it comes down to quite often a district attorney grabbing a case, looking at it, reading it over. Can we win this or not? And if they decide it's going to be difficult, it goes in the trash. And that's sadly effect. It has nothing to do
Well, it
with.
goes in the trash, or maybe they kick it back to you and say, "Go get more evidence."
Oh no, absolutely. But again, that's if they think that it's a winnable case.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? And so sadly for your listeners to understand, again, and I'm not beating up on the police department, but I am beating up on the system, that the police, again, are the truth seekers. We seek the evidence, we catch the bad guys, we put it all together, but we don't get to enforce anything. It's really not up to us. It goes into the courts. And the police quite often get the blame for law and order when we may be the law, but we have nothing to do with the order. That's up to the courts. And the courts, sadly, and it comes down to politicians. Even then, to the poor ADAs who are overworked and underpaid, just like everybody else in the system, they're the whole thing, where shit rolls downhill, and sadly for them, they're subject to the decisions of the politicians as well.
Yeah. Well, I actually had an attorney on a few episodes ago, and he's out in LA, and he was in the prosecutor's office for quite a while, and he was saying something, very similar. He's like, as an ADA, he couldn't survive in LA, or his wife was working basically for a nonprofit, and he's like, we don't get paid very much, and we were so overworked. He's like,
Absolutely.
we're trying to raise a couple kids, and he's like, I was putting in amazing number of hours. He was doing a lot of child, sex trafficking type cases, which are really, really difficult and taxing, especially as a human being. It's like, just having to watch the evidence, the video and things like that. And it's just brutal. And, I think, especially for you guys, and I think this kind of, there's threads that go across here. So as you know, I have a military background, and whenever I'm doing any research on past wars and things, that, you take the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was so winnable, it's just crazy. And yet we
We could
hear
have sent,
time.
and I'm not knocking when I say this. I'm not knocking our enemy, but
Yeah.
the size and scale in the Vietnam War, we could have sent the Boy Scouts over there and walked over that place in a week. And that's obviously a very exaggerated statement, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's no reason that should have went on for years and years and years. And the same with the
No.
nonsense that we do in the Middle East now. It's so much more political than actually getting the job done, which is an absolute disgrace and shameful. Yeah. And as a veteran myself,
and it's exactly. That's the same thing. What I was saying is just like you were describing with, once the politicians get involved, and then they push down certain policies and certain actions and things that, you can do and versus what you can't do. Like they in Vietnam, they said you can't go into Laos and other countries, you have to stay in Vietnam. Well, the bad guys, they found that out. And so what do you think they did? They were moving from North and South Vietnam in the other countries. They were in Cambodia, they were in Laos, they were all over the place. And, when it comes down to people that don't obey the law or don't, abide by certain principles anyway, and if you're stupid enough to handicap your own side, and whether that be law enforcement or the military, then of course you're going to lose. And it's at least going to take a lot longer, and it's going to be a lot more expensive, both in resources, but most importantly in lives. And, you think about, for example, in New York City, when politicians are basically saying, you can't do stop and frisk, you can't arrest people that steal something that's under $1,000. They restrict the amount of actual enforcement that the cops can do. Not only does that put the citizens in danger, but it also puts cops in danger. And sometimes you just look at them and you're like, why would you do that? That just doesn't make sense. That's like me as a dad saying, you know what, son, if some kid's pummeling on you and he's punching you in the face, you can't do anything until he punches you 10 times.
Whatever.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, and sadly, of course, it emboldens. Not only does it embolden current criminals, it creates new criminals because people aren't afraid. We've all seen it now with this nonsense in New York City and California, all over the nation, where people are just walking into, the CVS or your local Walgreens and walking out with as much stuff as they can put into a trash bag, you know,
Yeah.
with no worries about getting locked up at all, because if they are, they're released immediately, you know? And this has nothing to do with the police departments. And I would even say so much, it's not the ADAs who are working the cases, but it does have everything to do with the district attorney himself and with the mayor involved. In fact, when it comes to, again, back to law enforcement in general, forget about, you know, screw the president. The president has nothing to do with this, okay? And not that I'm usually happy with any of our presidents either, but the president has nothing to do with this. But every mayor, every single mayor in this country, all right, in every city and every town has the power to say, no, we're not doing this, okay? But instead of stopping crime, they embolden criminals, all right? They allow it to happen. They almost, are ask forgiveness, when somebody's arrested or, God forbid, roughed up a little bit by the officers who show up.
Yeah.
It's absolutely is disgraceful.
So
And
I got a little
it's
story, man. I was actually in Houston,
mhm,
and I went to, I think it was a CVS. It was either Walgreens or a CVS. And it was just maybe 2 blocks away from a really nice hotel where I was staying. And, in the kind of the business district of Houston. And then it was just, I don't know if you know, there's a beltway around the Houston, the major city
yeah,
part. And so this Walgreens it wasn't in a bad spot. I mean, it didn't look like a bad spot, but I'm in there. I'm, trying to buy some Gatorade and some other things that I wanted to just walk back to my hotel room. And this guy walks in right behind me, and I'm trying to check out, ring my stuff up, and he just walks over to a rack, grabs a few things, and the ladies behind the counter are screaming at him. They're like, "Don't you take that? Don't you take that?" And he just he's like, "Oh, I'm not." And but they knew the second that he walked
sure,
in, they spotted him just that fast, and they were like, "This guy's going to come in and he's going to rob us." And sure enough, he just grabbed, I don't know, a few things off of the little shelf right there and just walked out. They were,
mhm.
they were trying to run around the counter and try to grab him. I don't know what they would have done if they could have actually caught him before he went out the doors, because, these ladies aren't going to physically be able to stop him. But,
No, no.
that
And then
kind
you
of
know what?
stuff.
Again, if the police show up, they're not going to arrest the guy. And if they arrest him, the courts are going to let him out. And God forbid they're hurt, or they may even lose their jobs because Walgreens or CVS will say, "Well, we don't want you interacting with these people. Just let them take it."
Yeah.
When they're trying to do the right thing. It really has gotten just so ridiculous in the last few years.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's adding up though, because some of these stores are losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in theft and pilferage. And I don't know how big of
Well,
a
they're
company.
closing. They're
Yeah.
actually closing. There are,
Yeah.
cities who were losing them, by the dozens. They're closing 5, 10, 15, 20 stores because it doesn't make sense to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, though, is, so many people will say, "Oh, well, it's a bad neighborhood, blah, blah, blah." No, there are so many good, decent, innocent people living in these neighborhoods who need these services. They need to
Yeah.
be able to get their medicine. They need to be able to buy toothbrush, toothpaste, whatever it is. And, now they're going to close the store because of a handful of miscreants who were allowed to run wild by who? The local politicians. It does always, again, come back to the politicians, because the police officers, for the most part, police departments are more than willing to do their job if they're allowed to.
So back when you first got started in NYPD,
Yes.
what was New York like then?
Well, for me, it was home, so it was always what I knew. Crime was bad, but again, it's something that you're used to. There's areas that you don't go. There's areas that you do go. As a working guy, I was a construction worker. I worked all over the city, and I really never had a problem with anybody. But again, like I said, since the late '60s, early '70s, crime was murder in general. Because when a lot of times when we talk about crime, you have to realize that bosses a lot of times can fudge numbers or change numbers. But one thing that you can't, and the constant is always, is homicides. And we go by those numbers, or I tend to go by those numbers, simply because you can't hide a body. So you can't change a felony robbery to a misdemeanor robbery. You see, you can't change a felony assault to, you can change rather, a felony robbery to a misdemeanor robbery and or a felony assault to a misdemeanor assault, and these are the games that'll get played in the precinct and or in the court system. But you can't hide the bodies. If people are being killed, they're killed, and that's it. And so that's a very good way to check how crime is happening in your city. And for us, like I said, I think it was 1969 the first time that it had broke 1,000, and then year after year it crept up until 2000, 2200, 2300 mark, which was in the 90s. And yeah, that's when I was working at that time. And for me, as far as work, life, I lived in a decent neighborhood. I had a pretty good life. So it wasn't outside of, my school years. Crime was really not, an issue for me overall because you're aware of it. It's something that you're used to, sadly. But it was the Bronx in particular was a wild place to work. There was a lot of crime, a lot of homicides at that time. For instance, when I first started under the Things administration, I want to say we had something like 68, 69 homicides in my precinct alone. And that was the 5-2 precinct, which was only about a mile wide and maybe 2 miles high. Okay. The
Wow.
4-6, which was right below me, was a rocking little precinct. Okay. And they had, over 90 homicides that year. All right. And now the 4-4, which was right below that, was one cited as the busiest precinct in the world. Okay. And obviously that things were going nuts there too. But I always give credit to the 4-6 because the 4-6 was so small. It's basically 1 square mile. All right. And it was so small that, their numbers were astronomical. Now, during this time, once Giuliani, to get back to Giuliani, once he had taken over, he slowly beat those, not slowly, fairly rapidly. You figure within 8 years, those numbers were now below 600, you know? So think about that just for a second, how you can go from, 2300 homicides to 600, in such a short amount of time. That's because people are doing the job.
Yeah.
And he allowed them to not allowed them to do their job. He made sure through Comstat, if you're familiar with that, it was basically a way that they tracked all crime in New York City and made precinct commanders, address their crimes on a monthly then weekly basis. So they were able to track things all the time. And it was really a great way to, I don't want to say force, but yes, force, precincts, the police to do their job, because they were able to track it and pinpoint things and set up, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm getting older now. I'm losing my words, but they were able to pinpoint trends. There you go. And, quite often cut them off
Yeah.
ahead of time. So
Yeah,
it was a great system.
Everybody does that. You do that in business. You do that everywhere, and
Of
it's
course.
like,
But
how
that
do you
would
know
mean-
how do you know if what you're doing is succeeding or not? Well, you got to look at the trends. You got to look at the data, and if it's not working, then you got to change things. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy about our society today. It's like, that things aren't working the way they are right now, and yet it doesn't seem like anybody's changing anything. All they're doing is basically, like you said, manipulating the numbers.
Correct.
And I don't want to say fortunately, but like you said, the only thing you can't manipulate really is the homicide, because it's you have a dead body.
Correct.
And drive-by shootings and carjackings and rapes and assaults, all sorts of those. I guarantee those are skyrocketing, because to me those are kind of the indicators, the leading indicators that the homicides are coming.
Absolutely. And when the sad part about that too, and especially for people in more impoverished areas, okay, is they stop reporting. They stop reporting crimes because of their, their lack of trust in the police, because it is so much part of their life as it goes. So yes, your robberies, burglaries, rapes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these crimes quite often, how many are half of them not reported? Are 70% not even reported because they don't bother picking up the phone call because it's life as usual? It really is a terrible, terrible situation. So yeah, you do have to do the thing where you basically just, go by the homicide rate, because that doesn't change.
Well, it's even
can't
worse
be
than that,
changed.
I think, because if they're just letting them out, it's like a revolving door. There's no bail and things like that. Then they know if they report this guy for assault or anything else, then more than likely he's going to be back out on the street, and
Absolutely.
he's going to be pissed. And what's he going to
Absolutely.
do? The first thing he's going to do is come after me.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, Yeah.
Well, and
Crazy.
now with this thing, we have it in New York. I guarantee they do it in Chicago, in California, and other ridiculous states where everything seems to be upside down. But part of what they're doing with bail reform is they're allowing the criminals to know, okay, all of the complainant's information. They actually hand that over to the lawyers and to the criminals. So you know who it is that's where the complainant lives. They hand over the address to them. It is so unbelievably upside down.
That's crazy.
It is.
So
It
there's no
is.
more anonymous tips type thing.
Well, not so much that there are anonymous tips, but once we get into the court situation, you see what I'm
Mm.
saying? Once it goes to court, once it goes to trial, all of the complainant's information is handed over to the defendant's counsel. All right, so they know everything.
Wow. Yeah,
Absolutely
that's
ridiculous.
exciting. So
Yeah.
if you have a rape charge or something like that, then
Yep.
I hear this poor woman is trying to do the right thing and get a rapist off the street, and her personal information is getting put out there that I'm sure, this guy's got more than likely has friends. So, that's insane. All right, well, let's go back to the Giuliani years, because that's when things actually worked. Most of your time there as a detective, were you narcotics? What were you?
I was predominantly narcotics, yes. Most of my it had to do with the times in general. Most of my time in the police department, I worked narcotics. At first, in the precinct level, I was on a SNU team, which is a street narcotics enforcement unit. And then from there, I actually went to anti-crime, and then I did a little bit of time in a RIP, which is a robbery identification program. And then I joined the narcotics division. And at that time, actually, the Bronx Narcotics, probably is the same today, was the largest single command in New York City. It was a big, big command. And I don't know, we had probably, I want to say like 350, 380 guys just in Bronx Narcotics, because again, business was so good, you know? And that's why the vast majority of my career was spent doing narcotics. Yes. Narcotics work, narcotics related work.
So give me an idea of what you went through every day.
Mostly everything starts out with a buy and bust operation, which I'm sure you're familiar with that, where we would have undercovers who would go out and, do exactly that. They would buy drugs 2, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a night, whatever it is, and we would go out and immediately lock up the sellers. Then you take those sellers, all right, and you try to get more information out of them. And every once in a while, you can hook something, all right, and then get either a CI and or an undercover to actually make inroads into these different drug gangs. And that would be a case. And then a case, you would build a case and work the case and see how far up you could climb to truly try to, hammer some bad guys, you know. And that could take sometimes, weeks, sometimes months, and you would build it up. The idea there and the problem there is, of course, how much money is the city willing to give you to go, and then of course, once, drugs and or guns and violence, you know, become part of the mix, well, then you got to lock people up. You can't let it go anymore, you know. And so, and that was, it was good work. In fact, for just knowing how squad detectives work, and squad detectives are your true detectives in the police department, kind of like if you remember the old NYPD Blue, Sipowicz and that kind of thing, you know. I mean, a lot of those poor guys, they can easily have 100 open cases, that don't go away until you finish them up. And for us in narcotics, our cases are, are they selling drugs or aren't they? That's how simple it is. And if they are, you do your best to lock them up, So it was fairly simple work. Not when I say simple, it wasn't easy. It was very hard, very aggressive. And we locked up a lot of people back in those days. But it was, what do you
Well,
say?
when you say,
Go ahead.
when you say lock somebody up,
Yes.
what would a drug dealer have to actually do to get locked up? I mean, a certain amount of drugs. What would it take?
You mean to actually be put away?
Mm-hmm.
For us to lock them up, you just said, that's just selling drugs. Bang, we lock you up that night. But to actually be put away in the courts, quite often that's up to the judges, and it would depend on the amount of drugs and or the amount of arrests, okay, and or if any guns are involved. A lot of times we would actually try to intentionally buy guns off of drug dealers because judges don't like that. And they would get mad if there was, we had made 4 or 5 buys and then added a gun to it. Well, now they know that, violence and guns are mixed up in it. And so the judges take it more seriously. Back to, again, us not being part of law enforcement. It's up to the judges to enforce the laws, kind of what we were talking about before. So that being said, I think what you want to know is, yes, I've locked up guys, man, who have been locked up dozens of times. Okay. And it's once they hit that 4th, 5th, 6th time, the judge starts taking it more seriously. Guys who have already done time and have, maybe come back out, the judges again take it more seriously. But this quite often comes down to the judge. Again, how seriously does the judge take his job? Some take it very seriously, some don't. Some are quite literally bleeding hearts and, try to see it from the bad guy's eyes, which in some respect, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I can understand selling drugs. If you have nothing else going on in your life, I get it. I don't understand sex crimes. I don't understand, a lot of other things, but that's something that I can understand. If you're poor and you're hungry and you want to make a few bucks, I get it, but it is illegal and we're going to get you. But I don't know if I answered your question there. I kind of went off.
No, it's just bizarre. I hear back again. I'm a student of history. I love reading about the past and then comparing it to where we are now. And then, you can extrapolate a lot of, there's a cause and effect that happens all the time. And everything kind of goes in cycles. You said in the 60s and 70s, even the 80s, that led up to the worst part, which was the early 90s. And then, everything was going crazy. And so the population finally demanded that something happen. Boom, they elect Rudy Giuliani. He comes in from the Manhattan DA's or the South Manhattan DA's office. And, this guy's been putting away gangsters and all sorts of stuff. And so he's kind of a hard nose, and he comes in and he says, all right, cops, from now on, you are going to do your job. And if you're not doing your job, I'm going to get rid of you. And so, he kind of, that kind of attitude comes down. And, again, you look back at the, I kind of compare Giuliani to like George Patton in the World War II. Patton, he took over the 2nd Armored Division, and it was in a shambles. It was just, it was pathetic. And he went in there and he started cracking the whip. And, if guys weren't at breakfast at a certain amount of time, then too bad, you were hungry. And, their boots had to be tied, everything. It's like, if you want to be a crack unit, you got to look like a crack unit.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
So I'm going to throw a couple things. First of all, I agree with you 1,000%, and to look at the history now, because we can go back, 30 years ago when Giuliani first took over and see what he had changed, right? It, again, comes down to political will. And today, there is not the will. That same, what Giuliani had done spread across the country. Other cities started picking up on it and did the same thing. And it was a tremendous lowering of crime nationwide, and even in some of the craziest places, because they said, look, if New York can do it, we can do it, but now politics are so upside down. All right. And they've, and really quickly, really within the last 10 years have, with this anti-police nonsense, have beaten things down so very much. And back to what you just mentioned about turning the 2nd Armor into a crack unit, they've, how do I want to put this without sounding so, anti-police myself, but they've destroyed my police department. Okay. And they've done it through, and this started to happen back in my time, but they've done it, a lot of it through all of this, diversity hiring nonsense, where, let me step back a little bit and go back to my time. Okay. So in the 80s, when you would, you want to join the police department, they'd give a test every 4 years, and maybe 40,000 guys would take the test, right? 40,000 people would take the test. They would take the top 10% of the people that passed that. So let's say 4,000 people, right? These people would be called. Out of those people, they all had to then go through the psychological, through the medical, through the physical fitness exam in order to be admitted into the police academy. Okay. Now, even in my time, all right, we had saw where they did away with the age restrictions. So it used to be you had to be 28. And at the time, I was a little bit scared because I was starting to get older, but I did have my military time, which would have helped me out. But then they changed the rules, so it didn't make a difference. Okay. Now, we had people who I went through the academy with, and a couple of people who I liked very, very much who should not have graduated. And yet they graduated, you know? And now, again, going back to your crack unit scenario that you just proposed in World War II there, we have a much less desirable people through lowering the standards. You have a lower standard of police officer who's being hired, who's being asked to do the job. Okay. That combined with a mass exodus of police officers and detectives, senior personnel, because of the beating that you're taking by the political will of the cities involved. Okay. It's a great experience drain and brain drain on the police departments. So now what you end up with is a much less, do I want to use the word formidable, police department? Okay. A much less capable the police department, you know? And in the end, who do John Q. Citizen, when you dial 911, who do you want to show up? Do you really care about the race or gender or educational experience of no, you want the best possible person to show up. All right. But now the best possible people are not taking the job anymore. And it's really, really sad and very, very disheartening. And not to me, I'm talking about the people that are still doing the job. I mean, I'm long gone, but it's so sad for them. And then even worse, it's sad for the populations that they're supposed to be serving,
Well, it's not
because
just
again,
sad; it's dangerous.
dangerous, yes, but that's exactly what it's so disgraceful,
Yeah.
and
Well, how many videos have you seen in just the last week where a couple of officers and sometimes they're just a little out of shape, sometimes they're a little smaller, doesn't matter. But
it doesn't matter.
if the criminal's fighting them and the criminal's some big dude and he's fighting 3 or 4 females and they can't get him down, they can't get him cuffed, let alone get him in a car, and eventually he just fights away. And in fact, I saw a video, I swear it was like 2 or 3 guys. They could not get this criminal down. They had him down at one point, but they couldn't get him cuffed. So he finally worked his way loose, actually got in his car and tore out of there. It's like,
You see it every day.
yeah, but
But
these
then again,
guys, they're limited on the amount of force they can do.
Well, exactly.
And some of it's them physically, and that goes down to the meritocracy thing. But again, a lot of that is policy. And if they can't use their tasers, they can't use their, well, I guess in that scenario, it wouldn't really require a weapon. But I mean, if the guy's all jacked up on drugs so he's got this superhuman strength,
they've taken
it doesn't matter how many
immunity
guys are on top of him. They're not going to be able to do anything. Say that again.
Yeah. No, and they've taken qualified immunity away from so many departments also. All right. Which people, again, don't understand. They hear the word immunity. All right. But they forget the qualified part. All right. Qualified immunity does not mean if a police officer commits a crime, different story. He's committed a crime. But qualified immunity means somebody is hurt or, God forbid, killed, while an arrest is being made. The officer should be immune from that because he's doing his job. He's not hurting somebody intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
But that's been taken away from so many departments, and it really is shameful, because how is a man or a woman supposed to do their job if they're afraid of getting in trouble? They're not going to bother getting out of the car.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, why are they a cop at all? Well, go back to, they have rent to pay. They have mouths to feed. They took the job, because they were decent, honorable people and wanted to do it. And it turned out not to be the job that they thought they signed up for. But now they're 5-10 years in. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
So they stick with the job. But again, you're lucky if they show up when you call, and you're lucky if they get out of the car, And again, I'm not trying to beat up on the police. I'm trying to make people understand, if you do not give the police the power and the responsibility that they need, they can't do the job. In my time, we had basically a patrolman, a simple guy, uniformed guy on the corner, back when we used to walk foot posts. He had the authority of a sergeant today, and a sergeant had the authority of a lieutenant, you know? And towards the end of my time leaving when I was on patrol, still a uniformed police officer, they had come up with this thing where you would have, and I'm going back, 25, 30 years now. If you made an arrest, you would have to call a boss a sergeant to come and verify the arrest, which was a silly thing, again, invented by politicians because, well, you're not going to unarrest the guy. The guy's under arrest, but they wanted a supervisor to sign off on every step of the procedure, you see? And, the supervisors didn't take it seriously either. The whole thing was a joke. But the thing that is, again, the politicians putting in place rules that don't serve the public, There was another thing, well, I won't get into it. It's a little, I will. It's a little longer story, a thing called, which you probably have in your city now too, a DIR, which was a domestic incident report. Okay. The domestic incident report basically just says that there was exactly that, a domestic incident. And I fully understand why it was put into to use. But what it did again is it took a lot of responsibility away from the police department by adding another step and actually hurting decent working people. All right. And you're probably going to get somebody to write in about this. All right. But it's true. There was a time when you would show up, if I came to your home and you didn't call the police, maybe your wife didn't call the police. Okay. But the neighbor said you were arguing. Somebody called the police. I showed up. What do I have to do? I have to take your name. I have to take her name and write out this domestic incident report. Okay. This is now a everlasting record of nothing that happened at your house. Okay. Now, if you have this time and time again, it's gonna be a red flag thing, right? But again, you're a red flag. You're not creating a criminal out of incidents that have no bearing on crime whatsoever. Okay. And it creates again a criminal record because I should have back in our time shown up. Hey pal, how you doing? You having an incident? Blah 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 blah. You worked 2 jobs this week. You're breaking your ass to support your family. All right. And you had an argument with your wife. She's upset. She doesn't want you arrested. She certainly doesn't want you not being able to go to work in the morning. She wants none of that. Okay. But now I have to do something. You see, they're forcing me through this and through other must arrest situations. Okay. When there was a time ago, I said, look, take a walk around the block. Give me your keys. I hand them to your wife. Let them back in when things cool off. You can't do that anymore, And there are so many other things just like this that they've implemented, okay? But funny enough, once it goes to the courts, it's going nowhere anyway.
Yeah.
See? The onus
so
again is...
when you were there, when you're talking about this DIR,
yes.
So did you actually show up to places and you were forced to arrest somebody?
They came up with must arrest situations, sure. If I came, and they could be silly. They could be so silly. But now it's gotten to where police officers are actually afraid not to do things and or afraid to do things, right? And so to back that up, if I came, okay, and under this must arrest situation, okay, you and your wife, again, you had a row, whatever it is, okay, and maybe she scratched your face with her fingernails. This is an injury, okay? Now it's a must arrest situation. And you're saying, no, please, it was an accident, We had an argument. It's not a big deal. You're an adult. She's an adult. I'm supposed to be an adult, all right? But now I got to put the handcuffs on her.
Did you ever actually have to do that?
Yes, sir.
Mm.
Yep.
So you had to actually
I could tell you a very short, exact story, okay? A mother and a daughter, okay, had an argument, whatever, and somehow in the kitchen, the daughter was nicked with a knife, okay? And when I say nicked, it was a tiny thing. It was not stabbed, okay? It was not stabbed. We showed up. This was a very, very nice family, all right? Mother, father, two girls. The daughter was probably 16, all right? What in the world they were fighting about, I don't know. I had to arrest the mother, all right? I had to, not only do I have to arrest her, but by procedure, I actually have to rear cuff her, put her in the back of a police car, take her all the way through the arrest process down to central booking. Once in central booking, I explained the situation and I told the ATA, you cannot charge this woman. All right. She did not do anything wrong. But what would have happened, I had no choice anyway, because the boss was there. The sergeant showed up at the job, it must arrest situation. And it was all this whole hot thing where you had to arrest people. Okay. Again, not me. It was not me that did this. I had no choice in the matter, you know? And it's sad. But that's the opposite of course, is what's happening now, where police are now in trouble for doing their job, when it comes to
Yeah.
chasing true criminals. They want you to lock up for nonsense, you know, but they don't want you to lock up the real bad guys.
Yeah. Well, especially when you have these, like you said, these big hits, especially the viral videos that you see where there's like 40, 50 guys that storm into, an Apple store,
Mhm.
and they're literally ripping iPhones off of the tables and packing them in bags and running out. And, they don't do anything. It's like you can identify a license plate from just about anywhere in the country. And we have facial recognition software. We have all this stuff where they know who these people are, but they won't arrest them. And that happens over and over and over. But if it happens to, well, I was actually reading there's some stores in some places like San Francisco that they'll get hit multiple times a day. And then they're a small business. And, whether this is all part of a bigger scheme or something, I don't know. But the bottom line is, I know as a small business owner, if we got robbed a couple of times a day, we would
Oh,
be
you'd
out of
be out of business.
business. We'd be gone.
Yeah.
There's no way we could afford that. And there's
You
no
couldn't
way that I
afford it,
would
and
put my
you would be
employees through
you'd
that
be
anyway.
terrified. You'd be terrified to go to work.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you'd be terrified. It's what's happening to this nation is so scary, so scary.
Yeah. So did you have any like, really famous arrests on in your time, especially in narcotics and things?
Famous? I wouldn't say famous, but again, it's. I mean, I could tell you ridiculous stories about locking up guys. Sure. Um, would you like to hear?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us the one that, when you're hanging around with friends,
Oh,
it's always a fun story to tell.
well, I'll tell you one about a sad homicide. All right. Now, we were talking just about your recent district attorney friend from California. I think it was from California. You said
Hmm.
the next time you talk to them, ask him if they use this term, which from what I understand, they use all over it's news to me, but they use all over the nation now. It's a Bronx jury. Okay. So I'll tell you a little Bronx jury story. We had I wasn't a detective yet. I was an anti-crime at the time. In anti-crime, basically, you're out to make gun arrests, and you're not a slave to the radio. In other words, you don't have to answer to the radio. But we happened to be on this block. It was Davidson Avenue, and we got a call, and the call comes over the radio of a woman shot. All right, we happen to be like literally 4 or 5 buildings away from where this happened. Right, so we say, 5 to anti-crime, we'll take that. We ran over there. We go up the stairs, and as we go up the stairs, it was only on the third floor. The music was very, very loud coming from this apartment. Not a good sign, right? And I was working with this fellow Victor at the time. And so, we do the thing like we always do. You unlock your guns, you're ready, got your gun in your hand. I go and I touch the door, and the door is opened. All right. Not a good sign again. So I push the door open slightly. All right. The music is blaring. We walk in, and it was a long hallway that went down with rooms off to the right. Right. So we got our guns out. We go to the first room. All right. Nobody's in there. Next one, next one, next one. Nobody, nobody, nobody. We get down to the last room, which was one of the bedrooms, and there she is, this young woman. I believe she was 15 at the time. All right. Had been shot in the face. And what do you call it? Well, actually, she had been shot in the head. What had happened was these other drug dealers had come and did a robbery of her boyfriend and her boyfriend's roommate, who were also drug dealers. Okay. And it had been very obvious that they were looking for drugs and for money. And they had tortured these two fellas. One was dead on the floor. He had been shot in the back of the head. The other one, they had tortured first because they had wrapped his entire face from his hairline to his chin in duct tape so he couldn't breathe. All right.
Mm.
And they had shot him like 3 or 4 times. But something that you'll know when you're forensic people will like to know, is that he was laying on the bed, and although he had been shot several times and his face was wrapped up, he was obviously survived for a while because his heart continued to beat and pumped out so much blood that it soaked through the mattress and through the box spring onto the floor below. And I mean, there was a puddle maybe 3-4 feet around of blood underneath the bed that had all soaked through the bed and gotten down to the floor below. So he had survived for a while after being duct taped and shot. Now, this poor girl, they had shot her in the head. They'd put the gun right up against her temple and pulled the trigger. But guns do strange things, or bullets do strange things. And so what had happened was it traveled down the side of her face, went through her mouth, took out a couple of teeth here, came out her mouth on the other side, okay, and left, I don't know, 3 or 4 teeth and a bunch of gums, gum tissue were actually sitting on the pillow next to where they had shot her. So how long she was unconscious, before she made the phone call, I don't know. But she was able to get the words out and, have us arrive. So long story short, we do our crime scene stuff. All the detectives from the squad come. We sweep through all of that. And now it's, I don't know, a year, maybe 18 months later. Okay. And we're sitting in court. And through all of this stuff, we'd all done our different testimony. I had gotten up as being first on the scene. I described the crime scene. I described everything that happened. And for whatever reason, they had tried all of these defendants separately. Okay. One guy immediately took a plea. Okay. Another guy didn't take a plea right away, which hurt him because if you take a plea right away, quite often they don't hammer you. If this trial starts, the judge is mad at you, so he hits you a little bit harder, right? He ended up pleading once the trial had started. Okay. And then the shooter, the actual trigger man, okay, did not take a plea and was acquitted by the jury after all of that. After our testimony, all the police testimony, the little girl who got up, who's now like only 16, possibly 17 years old, came from her safe house in upstate New York that she was staying in because they had sequestered her away, for like a year and a half because she couldn't live in that neighborhood anymore. And after all of that, they acquitted him. Why? Because the police framed him. That was his whole thing, that the police framed him, which we did not. The other 2 testified against him. The young woman was able to identify him. But the Bronx jury was so anti-police that they said, we'll let him go.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there was 3 of them total.
3
they
of them
went
total.
in there, what? And you said it was a drug hit?
Yes, they were stealing drugs from the other guys. Drugs and money. Okay? And in order to get what they wanted, they tortured, they may have killed the one guy immediately. They tortured the other guy, and then probably tortured her too. I don't know, but decided to get rid of her so that she wouldn't be a witness. Shot her in the head, and here it was in the end, the jury. And like I say, some of your district attorney friends may be familiar with that term, a Bronx jury, which was who knows how long ago that was coined, but it's used all over the place, meaning we're not going to win this case, pal. When it's that's what they called it, a Bronx jury.
I mean, forensically, well, when did this happen? 90s?
Oh, geez, this would have been 93, maybe, in there. So, forensically, we didn't, and I know, you are our main DNA guy, right? But that really didn't play in to our stuff back then. It was still very, very new.
Yeah.
No,
DNA back then was just, I mean, basically you were just looking for blood types kind of thing. But,
correct.
Touch DNA, DNA off of shell casings and weapons, back then
but here we had 3 eyewitnesses. We had his two partners who ratted him out, and the victim herself.
Yeah.
And he was still acquitted.
Wow. Well, so once this guy's acquitted, what did he do? Do you have any idea?
Now, rumor has it, and I don't know if it's true, most of these guys end up, we get to know them somewhat personally. And from what I understand, and I don't know if it's the truth, but this is the rumor, he was actually killed by somebody else like 3 years later. And it had come back to me, hey, you remember that guy? Blah, 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 blah. Yep, they got him. Meaning somebody else had taken care of business for us. So, but it was sad state.
You think about how many lives were destroyed from that, though. It's like,
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then,
well, that's the thing with drugs too, Jared, that people don't realize is, how drugs really absolutely ravage neighborhoods, you know? And I've said this before, on other podcasts and things too, where people, when I'm explaining it, it's not, people want to do drugs. Americans want to do drugs. There's no getting around that. All right. And that's going to be the hardest part of stopping drugs, is that people want to do them. But now here you are, a decent fella, and you're living in a simple building in New York City, or, anywhere in the country. And you have, I don't know, maybe you live in a 20 family building. There's 20 apartments in your building. It only takes one to decide they're going to start selling drugs out of that building to destroy your building. Because right now you have every asshole in the neighborhood showing up to buy drugs at all different hours of the day, with your children and your wife walking in and out of there every day. And you might be big, hard, tough, all American veteran guy, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Because they know who you are. They know where you live. They know that your children are there. They know that your wife is there. What in the world are you going to do? You kind of just got to suck it up, right?
Yeah.
Now you take that same block, okay, where that one building is, and another drug spot opens down the block. So now maybe you got a heroin spot, and now you got a crack spot over on the other side. Bang. Now the drug activity is doubled, And people don't realize, too, that there may be, I don't know, 5,000 people live on this block, let's just say, okay? Because New York City, again, is a big place, and there's big buildings. There's a lot of people that live there, okay?
Yeah.
And you have literally, okay, in these two drug gangs, maybe 24 people ruining 5,000 lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's how little it takes to destroy a neighborhood. And then you have neighborhoods in the Bronx, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, where, the drug spots, 194th Street back in the 90s, all right, between Webster Avenue and Valentine Avenue, all right? It's only about a 4 or 5 block stretch. There were 10 different drug spots right there, okay? And on the off-shooting blocks, if you added them all up, going a block in either direction off 194th Street, there were probably 20 drug spots, okay? And all the different, violence, guns, brutality that went along with that. This was directly across the street from Fordham University, one of the greatest schools, not in New York City, in the country. It's a very serious, Fordham University. It's a very serious school. Right across the street, 194th Street in Webster, going up. Now, me and my partner had counted one time, and we probably were off because we probably missed some. And it was something ridiculous, like in a 5-year period, where there were like 15, 16 shootings and 8 homicides, okay, in this little 3-4 block area. How do you live like that? And again, most people are decent people. 90% of the world's population are decent people. It's just there's very few that ruin it for everybody else, but it's so concentrated. I remember during the height of the crack epidemic, there was a block in Washington Heights that was supposedly more dangerous than Beirut at the time. That was when all the Marine Corps stuff was going on in Lebanon,
Yeah, the Marine Corps barracks, like the bombing and stuff over there. Yeah.
But it was statistically more dangerous to walk down this block in Washington Heights in Manhattan, all right, than it was to take a trip to Beirut. If you want to play the numbers games, it's crazy. Places like, you get around a lot with your job. You travel all over the place. When you go down to Philadelphia is the poorest large city in America. Beautiful, physically a beautiful city, I think. There's a lot of things I like about Philly. But my God, the crime that is going on down there now. Baltimore's been lost as a whole, Baltimore's been lost for decades, man.
Oh, I got to tell you a little story about Baltimore.
It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So I went to a conference in Baltimore a few years ago, and this is before COVID. So it had to be actually 4 or 5 years ago now. And we're right there at the convention center, right downtown, right where the harbor is, and you got the USS Constitution right there, that old warship, for those of you that don't know. And it's a very touristy area, and that's like the cream of the crop for Baltimore. And that's kind of the area that we were in. Well, me and this girl that was next to me in the booth next to me, we decided, hey, you know what? There's a there's supposed to be a Italian restaurant just a few blocks away. Let's just walk over there and get some lunch. So and literally 3 blocks. So this is 3 blocks away from the best part of Baltimore. You would think that the city fathers of Baltimore would make sure that area was as safe as could possibly be. I saw, I mean, there was one guy that was literally urinating in a garbage can. He just pulled his pants down and was like going to the bathroom right there on the street in front of everybody. And we weren't the only people on the street. Here we are walking along, and we're business people visiting from other areas of the country at this huge conference, huge forensics conference. And I mean, we're looking at it and I'm like, holy crap. And this is like within a block away from the nicest, the best tourist area. I'm like, I can't imagine you go 5 more blocks into the city of Baltimore, what that would have been like. And
Well, I'm happy for you. You only caught a guy urinating, you know. I had a
well,
different
there
story.
were multiple alleyways and stuff like that where you look down there and you're like,
Oh, they don't care.
whatever's going down there, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yep. No, it's very sad. I had a not a similar incident, or a different incident in Philly. I was in Philadelphia. We were doing a thing called the Philly FM Fest. It was a big musical fest where it was a great idea, and they did it 2 years in a row. It was like 70 different venues all over the city, had shows at the same time. You could buy one pass, but it entitled you to go anywhere. It was kind of like the Northeast version of South by Southwest, which takes place in Austin, Texas, if you've ever been. And so I was at a show down there, and I stepped outside to get a little bit of air. And just as I step outside, fella, maybe about 35 years old, comes walking around the corner with a gun in his hand. I'm like, oh, shit, right? And he goes right around the corner and he sets himself up in a doorway. Like, for the people I can see, like this, he kind of set himself in the doorway. So people who are just listening, he fit himself so he wouldn't be seen by anybody walking down the block, but was inside the door with a pistol in his hand. Now, I know right away, this guy's up to no good, right? He's going to rob somebody, or more likely, possibly even be looking to shoot somebody, because of just his whole stance and everything about it. Like a fool, I immediately try to get everybody off the street into the bar, but that wasn't a good idea because then everybody wants to know why I'm trying to do this, right? I get on my cell phone, call 911, I explain what's happening, okay? Police show up, boom, boom. I mean, they were there, and 12, 15 seconds after the phone call, they show up. Bad guy steps out, tosses his gun underneath the car, and starts walking towards me back up the block. I was, of course, armed, take my gun out. Oh, you're not going anywhere, pal. Get on the floor. I get him laid down. The police come, lock him up, take his gun, whatever. In Philadelphia, it's only a misdemeanor to have an illegal gun. Okay. So it's not that big of a deal, but this guy had numerous priors before. So they were going to, try to get him out of conviction. I went, what was it? Probably, it could have been definitely over a year later. I actually went to the trial. All right. They could not believe that I showed up. And coming from the Bronx, which was an upside down place, okay, I was actually surprised at how, do I want to say poorly? Because I don't know the inner workings, but just what a mess their court system was. Okay. Obviously, again, way, 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 way overworked, not able to handle the volume that they were doing. Our turn came up, and, the judge says, is the defendant here? Yes, judge. Do we have the witness available? I stood up and I said, yes, ma'am, and the guy turned around and he said, guilty. He pled guilty right away. Again, because if it had gone to trial, he would have got hit harder, but it was only a misdemeanor, which is what shocked me. One of the best things we had ever done, of course, they don't follow these rules in New York City anymore, but back in our time, they had wised up and made any illegal firearm an automatic 1 year, a felony with an automatic 1 year in jail, and the judges could not impose that, and it was the best thing they ever did, because it made it so much more costly to be running around the streets with guns, because you knew you were going to go to jail if you got caught. So
yeah, I don't understand why it's so complicated. People are honestly it's almost like boringly predictable.
Yes.
If there's an incentive to do something, you're more likely to do it.
Hmm.
And if there's a punishment for doing something, you're less likely to do it.
That easy.
It is
Well,
no
now
more complicated than that.
now
You
you
know, if
mentioned
you
before stop and frisk, okay? And stop and frisk, as I'm sure you probably realize, is not stop and frisk. When it was implemented back in the early 90s, at my time, okay, it was stop, question, and frisk. It was the SQF. And in fact, you were made to do it. They had a little card, you had to fill it out, SQF form, stop, question, and frisk. And this is based off of this was a Bill Bratton thing, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But there's nothing illegal about stopping anybody, okay? Because we in America work off of English common law, right? And in English common law, we all, you, I, everybody in the nation, has the simple right to inquiry, okay? We all have this right. So the police, would get out of the car. Hey, how you doing? Excuse me, sir. How you doing today? All right. There, I've stopped you. This is my inquiry. Okay. Now, if you act suspiciously, maybe make a furtive movement, as they say, can't tell me where you're coming from or where you're going. Now, you don't have to. You don't have to tell me anything, but everybody always does, you know?
Mhm.
And through this, especially the more you do it, the better you are at it, especially if you're already a New York City person who grew up there, you have a good feel for what's right and wrong. Okay. And that does what? It raises my suspicions. You see? And then I could take it to the next level. Okay. There's absolutely nothing illegal or nefarious about it. It is stop, question, and frisk. Now, this being put into place was fantastic. Why? Because again, a place like the Bronx, okay? Bad guys all over the place. And so much of it is based on, just the way you survive is based on street cred, you know, in having a presence in the neighborhood. And so you have these dummies that would shoot each other daily, okay, for nothing more than the idea that somehow you disrespected me. I don't like how you looked at me. I don't like how you looked at my girl. You stepped in front of me online, whatever stupid nonsense they could come up with. And they immediately go to shooting each other. Okay. Half of this is out of bravado, half of it is out of fear because they don't want to be shot either. But regardless, when SQF went into place in the early 90s, and we were then not only encouraged to, but forced to do this job and to fill out the form. Remember, there's a form for everybody that you fill out. Okay. When we were forced to do this, what the bad guys immediately realized is they can't run around with guns. And it's the same thing, too. If you're getting stopped for smoking marijuana or stopped for drinking a beer or stopped for any number of nonsense things, okay, that's where we go back to. Everybody calls it broken windows, but we used to call it quality of life crimes, okay? But again, if I'm going to stop you because you're walking around with a 40 in your hand, you're not going to carry a gun. Now, you get into a beef in the bodega or at McDonald's or wherever you are with this guy who you would very much like to shoot, but now you got to walk all the way back home. And then when you get home, you got to walk up 2 or 3 flights of stairs, go into your closet, get the pistol, stick it in your hoodie or your pants pocket, right? Walk all the way back to where you had. There's a very good chance you're going to change your mind. And or the guy you want to cap is taking a walk. He's gone. And there you go. One less homicide in the Bronx today. Okay. And the police had nothing to do with it except for the fear of the police stopping you, you know? And this nonsense, too, where people say, well, you shouldn't be afraid of the police. Well, you know what? You should be afraid of the police. If you're a bad guy and you're doing bad things, you should be afraid of being caught and being arrested and being tried and being put in prison. So, yes, you should be afraid of that, you know?
Yeah,
And
there's a little
the police,
asterisk onto that saying. So,
well,
you know what? You
yes,
should never be afraid of the police if you're not doing anything wrong.
correct.
But if if you're a scumbag and you're out to cap somebody, then
Yes.
yeah, you should be afraid of the police because if they catch you and you're in the middle of that, or if they catch you after you've done it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And that's the way it should be.
When I was in like the aforementioned anti-crime unit, all right, which now is no more. They've gotten rid of anti-crime. The other unit I talked about too, SNU, Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit, they've gotten rid of these things because they decided they were too proactive. All right. And during the what was that idiot's name? Bill de Blasio's reign, okay, he removed these things. And then they wonder why crime goes up. Well, because you're not getting the bad guys before they get to do bad things, which is what we were doing. But during the my anti-crime time, we could literally do 30 stops in a night. There was nothing to it, sometimes probably maybe 50. Okay. And again, it's not that we're looking to harass people, Yes, we would target people that we deemed suspicious, worthwhile, worth stopping. And there's a lot of little things that you pick up on that, people fooling around with their pants, how they're dressed, and not because they happen to be black or Hispanic or whatever, but it's the whole way they move, act, etc.
Yeah,
Quite
they're
often
wearing a
people
heavy
don't
coat
realize
and it's not cold out.
ex-cons tend to walk next to a building, okay? Because it's what they've learned in prison. It's safer to be on the edge of the building than to be on the edge of the what do they call those balcony things that they're on?
Oh yeah.
It's a safety precaution, And so you just pick up on these things because it's our job to pick up on them. You start to learn. And once you get good at it, you start catching guys. But it was not unheard of at all for us to stop that many people a night. And if you're lucky, come up with a gun or two. And that's not easy either. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get guns off the street. It really is. And sadly, now with all of this being stopped, in fact, I think the new moron in charge, what is his name? I can't think of it right now. He's decided to restart an anti-crime unit, but they're in uniform instead of being plain clothes. So again, you're giving the guys a heads up because it's hard enough. It's hard enough for the police to sneak up on bad guys to begin with. If you put them in uniform, you're cutting that in half. And
Yeah. Well, and you combine the power of social media and texting and all that kind of stuff, and
yep,
you may as well just put a flashing light on top of the guy and
absolutely
say, yeah, this is the area you want to avoid. And yeah, it's bad guys get smarter and they adjust. And the thing about it is they adjust so much quicker than they're like a small business versus some monolith government entity. You can adjust to the changing environment so much quicker than than a big entity like the
for
entire
us,
police
like
force can.
in narcotics in particular, these were very, very serious businesses. I mean, they made millions of dollars a year. Some of these gangs, right? And yes, we had to play by their rules. Everything was based on their time clock. Everything was based on what they did, their new innovations, and they are very, very, a very innovative bunch. You know, and if you think that they don't know the rules, they don't know the laws, they don't know how to get around it. I mean, we're probably overall. I mean, if we're catching 5% of what's going on in the city, it's a lot. you
Mm,
know and
yeah.
that sounds very disheartening, but it's true. We're just scratching the surface, man. And that goes for any major city in the country.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
really not getting it done. You're constantly shoveling sand against the tide, constantly.
So one of the things you wrote to me was when you retired, you were medically discharged. What was that about?
Yes, well, during my time in narcotics, I what do you call it? Had a very nice young drug dealer cut my finger off. All right, my right index finger and my middle finger. It's kind of a funny story, I'll tell you. What do you call it? We had just gone out for the night. Now, when we used to work narcotics, we would break up into usually three cars. You'd have the arresting officer with the boss, with the sergeant. Okay, then an additional chase car. You'd have a couple of undercover cops, who would go out and buy drugs, okay, because we've been doing these buy and bust operations, and then the P van, which is the prisoner van. All right. Now, this particular night, me and my partner Nikki were in the P van, the prisoner van, and this was a rotating thing. Every night, somebody would do something different, and sometimes it even split the night. But I won't get into those details. So we were working the 4-7 precinct that night, which is a precinct we usually didn't work because it was a little bit slower than some of the other ones further south. But we were up there on this evening because there were some complaints, and we had just gotten out, and it was fairly early simply because because we didn't start until about 10 o'clock. So you figure it's probably about 11 o'clock at night. We were out there, and we pull up, and as soon as we park our van, I look over and I'm like, look at that. These guys are pitching. In other words, they're selling drugs literally, in the doorway in front of where we parked. Didn't even notice us, right? So we sit there, we put it over the radio. Don't bother sending it undercover. We'll just scoop these guys up because we'll do it real quick. We'll get them for possession. We'll get them for intent to sell. We'll see if we can find their stuff. All right. We hop out of the van rather. And I walked up first and I had my hood pulled up over my head. And the fella who was manning the door, so it was a vestibule. And if you're not familiar with a vestibule, for your listeners, it's usually two doors, right? There's a door to the building, and then you enter the vestibule, and then there's a second door that lets you into the building. And this is to keep the weather out, and that's where the mailboxes are, so the mailman can come do the mail, that kind of thing. And usually the first door is unlocked. As I went up, I was pushing the door open with my hand, and this fellow had his back to me. He didn't even see me, but his partner was sitting on the steps right across the vestibule. Yelled 5-0, 5-0 right away, meaning the police. And the guy with his back to me just turned immediately and like karate kicked the door closed, right? It came down, bang, right across my two fingers is what it caught. Took my index finger off and smashed up my middle finger pretty good. All right. Of course, I screamed, had a few expletives, The two of them shot into the building, never to be found, never to be seen again. Bang, they're gone. I'm holding my hand, yelling. I'm like, holy crap, My partner, Nikki, runs up behind me. He looks at me. He's like, what is it, Ghost? You can't believe what's happened, I pick up my finger, all right? This is the silly part now. I don't know why in the world we did this, but he helps me back, and I get in the rear of the van instead of the passenger seat of the van. Now, the rear of the van, of RP vans, they were just big empty cargo vans, all right? So there's no seats for me to sit in. There's no seatbelt to hold me in. Why in the world we did this, I have no idea. But see, this is what happens when you kind of have the little bit of a panic going on, right? So I'm sitting here, I got my finger, and I'm holding my bloody stump in my hand, all right, bleeding all over my shirt. And Nikki races me to Montefiore Hospital, which is probably all of about, I don't know, maybe 20 blocks away. But as he does, he's driving as fast as he can on these city streets, hitting the brakes at the lights, hitting the brakes at the stop sign. I'm sliding across the van, bang, hitting into the seats, yelling at him, stop driving so fast, you stupid bastard. He hits the gas. I'm rolling over on my back, holding onto this finger. In the end, we got to Montefiore, no problem. All right. 45 minutes later, my finger was back on. Okay. 8 months later, I'm out of a job. That's it. And you're like, really? Over your finger? Yes. Well, it was my trigger finger. Okay. And it doesn't work anymore. Even though my finger's back on, it doesn't bend properly, right? And for many, it still feels strange, but for many years, it was kind of like your foot goes to sleep. You know how that feeling? That's what my finger felt like for like 20 years. That's how my finger felt. But the big thing with that is that they don't care about Travis Myers. All right. What the city is worried about is lawsuits. Okay. So had I not been put out on what we call 3/4 or a line of duty injury, if I had ever had a bad shooting, they're afraid of me turning around and saying, hey, you made me go back to work, right? And or if, God forbid, something happened to me, my wife turns around and said, hey, you made him go back to work knowing that he had a bad hand, okay? And what happens?
So they were worried about you suing, not necessarily.
Correct. Well, my
wow.
wife's suing or a bad guy suing, all right, and getting, $600 million when in the big scheme of things, if they pay you, let's say $1 million over the rest of your life, I don't know if I'll live that long, but, they give you your pension, all right, they pension you out and you're done. Bang, that's it. Now, for me, not so bad because it was my finger, and I was able to do other things with my life. I know a fellow who got the whole side of his face shot off, missing an eye, had terrible headaches his whole life. Another very good friend of mine broke his back, had the spinal fusion. For a guy like that, you can never, not that he did, but, he could never go horseback riding, water skiing, play football with his kids. He's in bad shape, and not to mention the pain. So for me, it was not a bad deal at all, except, yes, I would have rather stayed on the job. I would have rather, I would have certainly had a better pension had I stayed because I would have not only been making more money, but you lose all of that, the aggregate. I didn't get to my full earning potential in the end, you see? So, but overall for me, it was not a bad deal, considering what happened, even if it wasn't by choice. So.
Well, regardless, man, we thank you for your service, and for serving what you did. So, hey, before we wrap up, man, you got to tell me about how you went from being a cop to being an author of these crime mysteries.
Okay, well, we started that came later. We only started it in, I want to say, the first book we wrote, Sister Margaret, which I know you read. Okay. We wrote that in 2017. It took us a couple of
Probably
years
from
to
my
get.
reaction when I texted you, I was like, "What the freak, man?"
Well, my sister, who you met, Natasha,
Yeah.
okay, we wrote that in like 2017 and it came out in 2020. And we did it completely as a goof because I'm one of those guys, if you get me started, I could talk for hours about nonsense. We just get going. I got stories and I could tell you about the cops, New York City, the army, whatever the nonsense is, we'll talk. And people would always do that thing. Oh, you know what, Travis, you should write a book. You should write a book. And, you know, people say that enough times, you start to believe it. So I called my sister because she's a smart one. And I said, hey, Tosh, what do you think, man? You want to team up with me and we'll put a book out? And she immediately said, yeah, I don't even think I finished the sentence before she said yes, you know?
Hmm.
So we wrote Sister Margaret. Um, and who knew, but the thing took off like a shot. And really it's a very simple, very short story, but somehow it struck a chord with people. People liked it. Next thing you know, we had 2, 3 more out. The fourth one just came out a couple of weeks ago on, what was it, November 10th. The fourth book, Lee June, just came out. And it's been a really, really cool ride. And what we do is we take real stories, kind of like what we talked about today, and we twist them together. So I'll take 3 or 4 real stories and twist them into one fictional story that Detective Tommy Keane, the protagonist, the hero of the stories, will go through. And we decided to do that rather than doing a 600-page story of Travis's life in the police department or whatever. We thought it would be more interesting, one, if we could do fiction, make a lot more things happen to the characters in a short amount of time, because otherwise stories can be quite boring, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Police work is very boring.
Yeah. Most
People
people
don't
don't
believe
want to
that,
actually read autobiographies.
but it is correct. And so we have more fun with the fictional character. Plus, it keeps us out of court. And what I mean by that is, we don't have anybody coming up saying, hey, man, you shouldn't have used my name. You shouldn't have told my story, whatever. We kind of fictionalize it and twist it around. And it says on the very first page, work of fiction. So it keeps us out of trouble. And that's been a really, really interesting ride. It has. And like I said, when you and I we met at CrimeCon, you know,
Yeah.
and that was that was our first one. It was a great experience. And we'll be seeing you again in, what is it, May 31st in
Yeah.
Nashville.
Yeah. I need
Right?
to. I still haven't had time to follow up on that. I just got home from Tennessee last night. Got a lot of stuff to catch up on once my travel is done for the year. So now that's
You hit it hard, man. You really travel a lot with this MVAC
I
thing.
do. There's a lot of agencies that need training on their new MVAC systems. So
Mhm.
man, I got to go. But
Yeah.
I love it. I love interacting with crime scene investigators and DNA analysts and people that are doing the work. And it's just a fantastic career that I've just kind of fallen into thanks to my dad. So yeah, I'm making the best of it.
Well, good. And you're doing a good thing too. I mean, this DNA stuff it has changed, law enforcement so much for the better. It's unbelievable
Yeah.
what's come out of this DNA. And again, in my time, it was we never used it at all. I mean, just like fingerprints. People think fingerprints were so. I never used fingerprints. Never came through. Very very rarely do you come up with a decent print. But DNA, there's no arguing there. If you got it, you
Yeah,
got it.
it can be pretty compelling, but
Yeah.
the thing about it is, regardless of what kind of evidence it is, to me, the fulfilling part is whether our machine is used to help solve a crime or not. But when you get a phone call from whoever and, you have actually helped bring justice to some poor girl, that's been raped or whatever, there is just nothing that I've experienced that is even remotely close to how fulfilling it is. And I just, the first time we got a phone call that like a sheriff or a detective or somebody is saying, yeah, we got him. You're not going to
Yep.
believe this. We got DNA off of a rock or some crazy thing like that. And they're like, because of that, because of your machine and your dad's invention, we were able to solve this case that was 30 years old. And yeah, to me, it's just wow. Getting those phone calls, even as rare as they are, there's nothing like it.
So, so many people going in this world, you know, and it is quite often it's called a thankless job. Police work in general, law enforcement in general, is called thankless, but it is the very few thank yous, or when it's not even a thank you, but you did the right thing, you got a bad guy, you stopped somebody. It is very gratifying. I remember my short time working in a robbery identification program when I worked with those guys in there, and I would go on all these different robbery cases. Man, were people happy when you were able to get the person that robbed them, especially if it was a serious and a scary robbery. You know, they were thrilled because, again, quite often they have little trust in the police, they have little trust in the system. And here they are saying, yes, that's the guy. Thank you so much for getting him. Times that I had gotten, just numerous bad guys time and time again, where the victims were, so very, very grateful that somebody stood up for them. And that makes it all worthwhile. It absolutely does.
Yep.
Or finding a missing child. You find a missing child, man. I mean, you're king for a day. Forget it. You don't even need thanks because in your heart, how bad that could have been, and how scared you were at that time. And it's a beautiful thing. And so absolutely, man, knowing that your machine and your training has brought some sort of closure to a family, that's phenomenal. It really is.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's the bottom line is that's why I do what I do. You know,
yeah.
I miss a lot of football games and things like that, but it's I'm the guy and I'm the dad and the provider but most importantly I want to make a difference in life, and I think all of us do. And so whatever little difference I can carve out, then I'm going to do what I have to do that. So just like you did, man. And like I said, every cop to me, if you're willing to actually sign up and especially knowing what you know now, like, the people that are brand new recruits that are signing up to be a law enforcement officer right now, man, hats off to them, because these guys, they deserve a serious amount of appreciation because there's so few. And it's like you said, it's such a thankless job. It's like, holy crap, man, we've got to change that.
To all the misery we were talking about before with the politics, New York City now, I had mentioned, at my time we were about 38,000 strong. I believe we have just for the first time dipped below 30,000. Okay? Because over 2,500 guys there was a mass exodus with so many people leaving.
Mm.
And it's really a scary, scary situation. And they're talking that it could get as low as 2,500 police officers in New York City, which
Or
is, you know,
25,000.
25,000. I'm sorry. Yes, 25,000, which again would be 13,000 less than my time.
Wow.
All right. And no good can come
I'm
from that.
sorry. A city the size of New York, you cannot keep those city streets safe with that few people. You can't.
Can't. Well, you couldn't. Again, going back to my time when we did have 38,000 guys, we could have used twice as many. Because, even in my precinct, which was a very, very busy house, we would turn out like 4 or 5 cars. Now, granted, you might have some anti-crime guys or some SNU guys or narcotics squad would be working, but as far as actual patrol guys answering the radio, there was never enough guys. And on a busy night, not every night, so I don't want to exaggerate it or make it sound impossible, but on a busy Friday or Saturday night, you could easily do 25, 28, 30 jobs in a night. Now, if a job is a call, okay, just divide that into 8 or divide that by 8 hours. 8.5 hours is what we worked. You know, you're going job, 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 job. They're holding 5 jobs waiting for you,
Yeah.
and people are unhappy because you're not showing up. And quite often you're doing that thing where you show up. Is anybody hurt? What's happened? Blah, 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 blah. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Have a nice night. I got 5 jobs waiting for me. And you got to hustle off to the next one, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And it's really, really sad because you cannot serve the public the way they need to be served, you know? And now you're cutting that not in half, but what, by a third at least? You know?
Yeah, it's crazy.
No, it's nuts. It's nuts. It's very scary. Jared, it's
Crazy.
very scary, you know? And that's
Yeah.
nationwide. That's not just New York. That's nationwide that's happening.
Oh, I know. Well, which is why the people fleeing out of the crazy states and the crazy cities. It's like
Yep.
my neighborhood in Utah. Man, they can't build the houses fast enough out here.
Right.
So we've been
Well,
trying to keep it a secret, but we got all these
I'm
crazy New
sure
Yorkers moving in.
I know from our past conversations you're fairly politically astute, all right? And I'm sure you probably realize that California lost so many people, okay, that they lost a congressman. That's how many people left the state of California, that they lost a congressman. Same thing in New York State. So many people left New York State for Texas, Florida, Tennessee, wherever they're going. I know a lot of people both in Texas and Tennessee that have left New York. All right. And so many people have left that we actually lost a congressman because we don't have
Yeah.
enough people to support that many congressmen. It's wild,
Well,
man.
every congressman represents 750,000 people.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
no, we gained a congressman not long ago. That's
Oh,
when,
believe it, sure.
yeah, that's when Burgess Owens is our current congressman. Yeah, I love that guy. He's awesome. So
Good.
Okay, brother. Listen, everybody needs to go and visit. Where can people find your book?
Anywhere. So obviously Amazon, and although I can sit here and complain politically about what Amazon is doing to the country and the world, it will be there tomorrow. It'll show up tomorrow, and it'll be probably half price than anywhere else. But Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, anywhere books are sold, it's available. It might not be on the shelf, but it's available everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, please check them out, man. If you're watching this show right now and you're a crime fan and you want to listen to some crazy stories or read some crazy stories, please pick it up. Tommy Keane Detective Series. You'll be happy you did.
Yeah. Tommy Keane, and the first book is Sister Margaret.
Correct.
And I promise you, when you finish that last chapter, you'll be like, what in the... Yeah.
And the next
that one
time
blew
you
me
and I
away.
meet, I'll tell you all about the true stories in Sister Margaret. And of course, if you caught up on a few more books, I'll have some more true stories for you.
All right. Sounds great, man.
Very good.
Hey,
Well, I'll
appreciate
see
it.
you in May, if not before.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities.